Have you ever felt distant from the people you once called home? Carl Jung believed healing is not just recovery, it is transformation, and with transformation comes separation. When you begin to heal, to truly confront your shadows, you no longer fit where you once did. This isn't abandonment, it's evolution. The deeper you go within, the fewer will follow. But that's where your power begins. This journey isn't about loneliness, it's about becoming who you were always meant to be. In the journey of self-healing, one is not merely repairing wounds, one is engaging in a deeper act of individuation, a term Carl Jung used to describe the process by which a person becomes whole and distinct from the collective noise of the world. Healing in this sense is not linear and not always gentle. It is more akin to the peeling away of false identities, attachments, and illusions that we once thought were essential to who we are. And in this unraveling, in this sacred confrontation with the self, we begin to see the contours of our real identity, sometimes for the first time. It is this reorientation toward one's inner world that slowly alters how we relate to the outer world. What once comforted you may now feel constrictive. What once felt familiar may suddenly seem foreign. Jung warned that the individual who awakens must pay a price for their consciousness, and often that price is a profound disconnection from their former relationships. But this disconnection is not a punishment, it is an initiation. When you begin to heal, you begin to see clearly, and seeing clearly often means recognizing who no longer sees you. This shift begins quietly. In the early stages of healing, you may still try to maintain the relationships you once clung to, thinking you can bring others along on your path. But inner work is solitary by nature. You begin to question not only how others treat you, but how you have treated yourself in the name of belonging. You observe the roles you've played, the pleaser, the fixer, the chameleon, and you realize that many of these roles were adopted for survival, not authenticity. This realization cracks something open. The false self begins to wither, and with it so too do the dynamics that required that false self to survive. Carl Jung taught that every step toward consciousness is a confrontation with the unconscious. As you heal, you begin to realize that many of your connections were trauma-bonded, rooted in shared wounds rather than shared truths. And the more you bring those wounds into the light, the less resonance you feel with those who have not yet begun that journey. It is not judgment, it is frequency. You no longer vibrate in the realm of unconscious patterns. You become aware of your projections, your defenses, your self-abandonment. You begin to choose stillness over stimulation, peace over performance, and solitude over shallow company. This inner shift is what makes healing so disruptive. Others may interpret your evolution as distance, arrogance, or detachment. But in truth, you are not leaving them behind. You are simply no longer willing to leave yourself behind. You are honoring the self, another Jungian concept referring to the unifying center of the psyche. And when the self becomes the compass, everything inauthentic falls away. Relationships built on codependency begin to dissolve. Conversations that once felt effortless now feel empty. The mask you wore to feel accepted no longer fits your face. This can be painful, very painful. There is mourning involved, not just for the people you are losing, but for the version of yourself who needed them. You may feel guilt for outgrowing those you love. You may want to shrink back into your old self just to keep them close. But that is not healing, that is regression. Jung emphasized that the path of individuation is not about comfort but about inner necessity. The soul calls you forward, and your task is to obey, not to be understood, not to be liked, but to be whole. Eventually you come to accept that some people are chapters, not lifelong companions. They were with you when you were wounded, fragmented and searching. But now you are becoming integrated, and integration demands that you surround yourself with people who meet you with equal presence, not projection. People who speak from their scars, not through them. People who do not fear your growth because they are growing too. Healing transforms not just who you are but what you require. You no longer crave validation, you embody it. You no longer seek rescuers, you trust your resilience. And so you begin to attract relationships that are rooted in wholeness, not wounds. This is not immediate, and it is not guaranteed. There may be long seasons of solitude, periods where it feels like no one truly sees you. But in those seasons you are being refined. The inner alchemy is taking place. You are becoming more of yourself and less of what the world conditioned you to be. Carl Jung said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." When you heal, you are no longer dreaming of who you might become, you are awakening to who you already are. And in that awakening you are bound to shed skins, connections and stories that no longer serve your truth. So yes, when you heal, you outgrow almost everyone, not out of pride, not out of coldness but out of alignment. And that alignment is not selfish, it is sacred. Because the more authentic you become, the more you make space for relationships rooted in mutual respect, deep presence and shared growth. You begin to realize that the goal was never to be loved by everyone, but to be loved deeply by a few, including yourself. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Within this statement lies the very essence of why true healing, growth and transformation demand the painful, yet liberating act of releasing attachments to the past. The past is not merely a collection of events, memories or relationships, it is a framework. A psychological blueprint we unconsciously follow, built from our earliest experiences of love, abandonment, fear, and acceptance. To grow is to dismantle this framework piece by piece, to examine its construction, and to decide consciously what remains and what must go. Human beings are profoundly conditioned to hold on. We hold on to who we used to be, to people who defined us, to identities we constructed for survival, and to stories that comforted us even as they limited us. Jung would describe this as living in the realm of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate the world. It serves a purpose, especially in the early stages of life. But as we grow, we start to see the limitations of this persona. We become aware that what once protected us now imprisons us. This is the moment when growth becomes necessary, and attachment becomes the obstacle. Growth is often idealized as a beautiful and fulfilling process. But Jung taught that real growth, individuation as he called it, often feels like disintegration before it feels like liberation. The ego resists change. It clings to what is familiar, not because it is good, but because it is known. To let go of the past is to step into the unknown, and the unknown is where the unconscious lives. That is why growth often feels terrifying. You are walking into territory that has never been navigated by your current self. Letting go of attachment is not about forgetting or devaluing the past. It is about understanding that the self you are becoming cannot be fully born while you are still tethered to the self you were. Carl Jung emphasized the importance of integration, bringing unconscious material into consciousness so we can live from a place of awareness rather than habit. When we hold on to the past too tightly, we stay in loops of unprocessed emotion. We replay old conversations. We romanticize old relationships. We fear repeating old mistakes, and all of this binds us to a version of ourselves that no longer reflects our current state of consciousness. You might begin to notice this shift subtly. You hear someone from your past speak, and their words don't land the same way. You return to a familiar place and feel strangely distant. You look in the mirror and feel like the person staring back is someone you're still getting to know. These are not symptoms of confusion, they are signs of growth. You are beginning to detach not only from people and places but from emotional patterns and psychological habits that have shaped you for years. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the unconscious part of the psyche that contains everything we repress. Much of our past is embedded in that shadow. The beliefs we inherited but never questioned. The traumas we normalized. The behaviors we repeated because they felt safe, even if they hurt. When you begin to grow, you don't just move forward, you begin to dig downward into the roots of your identity. You question everything, your desires, your motivations, your attachments. You begin to understand how much of your past was survival, not authenticity. In this excavation process, something powerful happens. You start to release the emotional contracts you made long ago. The silent promises to keep the peace, to stay small, to be who others needed you to be. You begin to write new contracts, ones rooted in self-respect, integrity, and truth. And this rewriting demands release. You cannot be both the caterpillar and the butterfly. You cannot grow and stay attached to every element of your former life. Some relationships will fall away, some dreams will fade, some parts of you will grieve. But in that grief there is also freedom. Letting go of the past is not an act of dismissal. It is an act of deep reverence for who you were, for what you endured, and for who you are now capable of becoming. Jung would say that the psyche is always striving toward wholeness, but that wholeness is not found in repetition. It is found in integration, in movement, in evolution, and evolution by its very nature requires death. Not always physical death, but symbolic death, the death of outdated roles, relationships, and narratives. This is where many people stop. The pain of letting go becomes too heavy. The past starts to call with its familiar warmth. The ego tempts you to regress, to go back to what was, because what is emerging is still too unfamiliar. But if you can stay in the discomfort, if you can sit in the ambiguity long enough, something miraculous begins to unfold. You start to find peace in your own presence. You start to trust your own inner compass, and slowly you begin to realize that what you let go of was never truly you, it was the scaffolding. Necessary perhaps for building, but never meant to be permanent. Carl Jung believed that the goal of life is not perfection, but completeness. And completeness can only be achieved when we are willing to confront, release, and transcend the attachments that keep us bound to outdated versions of ourselves. Growth is not about becoming someone new, it is about unbecoming everything that is not truly you, and in that unbecoming, we find a quiet strength. A strength that is not dependent on who stays, who understands, or who approves. A strength that comes from within, from the self that has always been there, waiting to be remembered. Carl Jung once noted, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But this becoming is not a simple unveiling, it is a dismantling. Healing is not about improvement in the way the world often defines it. It is not about getting better so others will approve. It is about shedding layers of conditioning that were never truly yours. It is a return, not to who you were, but to who you were meant to be before the world told you who you should be. As we begin the healing process, we start to distinguish between the ego and the self. The ego is the construct we develop in response to our environment. It is necessary, but limited. It is built from our early experiences, from the way we were treated, from the roles we played to survive. The child who was ignored might become the performer. The one who was controlled might become the rebel. The one who was rejected might become the people pleaser. These identities are not chosen, they are inherited through adaptation. Carl Jung would say they are responses to the demands of the external world, not expressions of the inner self. Healing begins when we become conscious of the gap between who we are and who we have been pretending to be. This is not an easy realization, it is disorienting. It can feel like a loss, even a betrayal, especially if you've been rewarded for being the mask. But Jung warned us that identification with the persona, the social face, is dangerous. The more we cling to the persona, the further we drift from authenticity, and eventually, life begins to echo this distance. We feel hollow, misunderstood, disconnected from joy. Healing invites us to walk back toward our center. This walk is not linear, it doesn't move in predictable steps. Instead, it meanders through shadow. The shadow, as Jung described it, is the unconscious repository of everything we've repressed, feelings, desires, traits we were told were unacceptable. The healing process draws these parts into awareness, not to condemn them, but to reclaim them. What we often mistake as healing, becoming more polite, more agreeable, more spiritual, is sometimes just a new mask. True healing is messy. It makes you less certain, not more. It breaks you open before it binds you whole. To discover your true identity, you must be willing to hold space for discomfort. You must allow parts of you to speak that you've long silenced. The angry child, the sad teenager, the anxious adult. These voices are not intrusions, they are invitations. Jung believed that the psyche has a self-regulating nature. When we suppress parts of ourselves, the unconscious will find ways to bring them to the surface, through dreams, projections, even psychological symptoms. Healing, then, is not about banishing these expressions. It is about listening to what they are trying to teach. As you heal, you begin to notice how many of your preferences, choices, and beliefs were not freely chosen. You start to ask difficult questions. Do I actually enjoy this career, or did I pursue it for validation? Am I truly this agreeable, or am I afraid of being abandoned? Do I even know what I want, or have I always been guided by fear and approval? These questions mark the beginning of individuation, the psychological process Jung described as the integration of the conscious and unconscious into a unified whole. It is through this process that the true self begins to emerge. This true self is not created, it is uncovered. It was always there, beneath the conditioning, beneath the expectations, beneath the defenses, and when it begins to speak, its voice is quiet at first. It doesn't yell over the ego. It whispers in moments of stillness, in choices that feel strangely aligned, in relationships that reflect back your essence, not your wounds. The more you listen, the louder it becomes. The more you follow, the freer you feel. Healing then becomes not a goal, but a path toward inner alignment. It's important to understand that the discovery of your true identity through healing often comes with grief. Because to become who you are, you must let go of who you thought you had to be. That version of you, the one who overperformed, who stayed silent, who denied their needs, was doing their best. You may feel loyal to them, but Jung reminds us that growth requires sacrifice, and sometimes the greatest sacrifice is the identity that kept you safe, but small. This is why healing can feel like isolation. Not everyone will recognize the new you. Some may accuse you of changing, others may feel threatened by your boundaries, or confused by your transformation. Jung taught that the path to wholeness is deeply individual. It cannot be dictated by society, or validated by others. The journey inward is yours alone, but it is also the only journey that leads to peace. What emerges on the other side is not perfection, but congruence. You begin to speak words that reflect your thoughts. You begin to take actions that reflect your values. You say yes only when you mean it. You say no without guilt. You stop outsourcing your worth. You stop performing, you simply are. And in this being you find a strength that is quiet but unshakable. Because it is no longer tied to roles or approval, it is anchored in truth. Carl Jung believed that each individual carries within them a blueprint, a unique potential that longs to be expressed. Healing is the act of aligning with that potential. It is not about fixing yourself. It is about remembering yourself, reclaiming the pieces that were buried, unlearning the lies you were told, and choosing every day to honor who you are becoming over who you were trained to be. Through healing, you do not become someone new. You become someone real, and in that realness, you will find freedom. You will find purpose, and most importantly, you will find yourself. Carl Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul." This truth becomes painfully evident when we step into the process of inner growth. Because to grow is not merely to add new knowledge or skills, it is to peel away the illusions that once made us feel safe. And in this shedding of illusion, distance is born. But this distance is not a result of hatred, rejection, or arrogance. It arises as a natural consequence of waking up from the dreams others are still living in. When we begin to truly grow, we do not move away from others with cruelty. We move away from false versions of ourselves we once brought into relationships. We begin to realize that much of what we called connection was actually mutual wounding. The roles we played, the silence we maintained, the compromises we made, many were acts of survival, not authenticity. Growth calls us to step out of that dance, and those still dancing will often not understand why we left the floor. In Jungian psychology, there's a deep emphasis on individuation. a lifelong process of becoming the self. It requires us to pull our projections back in, to stop looking for validation from others, and to begin cultivating our own inner authority. This is deeply threatening to systems built on unconscious agreement. Friendships, families, and relationships often rely on shared illusions: who we are, what we should be, what roles we must never abandon. When we begin to question those roles, we disrupt the equilibrium. But this disruption is necessary. Jung often spoke of the danger of staying unconscious, how the refusal to grow results in the very suffering we try to avoid. The pain of being misunderstood, the loneliness of stepping into our truth, the grief of no longer belonging, these are not punishments for growth. They are markers of transformation. They show that you are no longer willing to live beneath your own potential, just to be accepted. They show that you have decided to honor the self more than the persona. Let us understand the illusion we're talking about. It is not only about others. It is about the false security we built within ourselves. We believed if we kept the peace, we'd be loved. If we played small, we'd be accepted. If we met everyone's needs, we'd never be abandoned. But these were illusions we formed before we knew who we were. They were coping strategies, forged in childhood, reinforced by culture, and worn like armor. Growth shatters them. Not all at once, but slowly, painfully, deliberately. As you grow, you realize that peace bought through silence is not peace, it's self-abandonment. Acceptance earned through betrayal of your own truth is not acceptance, it's performance. Jung would argue that the psyche rebels against such disintegration. The unconscious begins to stir. Anxiety, depression, emptiness. These symptoms are not signs of failure, but signals from the soul that something is out of alignment. The illusion must be exposed so the true self can emerge. Growth demands integrity, and integrity demands distance from chaos, from codependence, from unspoken contracts that ask you to remain less than you are. You may love someone deeply, but if that love is contingent on your unconscious compliance with their illusions, then it is not love that binds you, it is fear, and growth always reveals the difference. You begin to see where love has been distorted into control, where care has become obligation, where connection has turned into entrapment. Distance then becomes a boundary for the soul. It is the space in which you can hear your own voice again. It allows you to remember what you believe, what you value, what you want, without the interference of projection or guilt. Jung reminded us that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off parts of ourselves to fit in, but by embracing the totality of who we are. Sometimes, that embrace requires walking away, not because you are better, but because you are finally being honest. It is also important to say that the distance growth creates is not always permanent. It is not about exile. Sometimes, the very space that growth requires becomes the catalyst for others to reflect, to awaken, to meet you in a new way. But that cannot be the goal. Growth must be walked for its own sake, not to change others, but to reclaim yourself. If others grow beside you, that is a gift. If they don't, that is their path. Either way, you cannot betray your evolution to maintain an illusion. And so the journey of growth is not one of isolation, but of revelation. You begin to see things as they are, not as you wish they were. This clarity hurts. It will make you nostalgic for naivety. It will make you long for the days when connection felt easy, even if it was built on lies. But as Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The illusion must be lost so that love, real, unconditional, sovereign love can be found. You grow, and some relationships end. You grow, and some dynamics shift. You grow, and you stand alone more often than you'd like. But you also stand in truth, and from that place the relationships that remain or that form anew will not require you to shrink, to perform, or to pretend. They will meet you where you are. They will grow with you, not grip you. They will celebrate your truth, not resent it. Growth creates distance not from love, but from the imitation of love, and that is a sacred separation. It is the clearing of the path so that what is real may finally take root. And so in the unfolding journey of healing, we come to realize that our transformation is not a betrayal of others, but a return to ourselves. Carl Jung taught that the process of individuation, of becoming whole, inevitably leads us away from the masks we wore and toward the truth we long denied. This path is not paved with comfort, but with confrontation, the kind that reveals who we are beneath conditioning, expectation, and fear. Healing strips away the roles that once defined our relationships. It removes the scaffolding of dependency, control, and unconscious agreements. It leaves us raw, yes, but it also leaves us real. And in that reality, we meet our inner authority. We begin to walk not for applause, not for approval, but from a place of inner integrity. This is the deepest form of respect, self-respect. Yes, healing creates distance, but not out of pride. It is the distance clarity creates from confusion, authenticity creates from illusion, and truth creates from convenience. We stop resonating with noise because our souls have begun to sing a different song, one not written by society, or trauma, or fear, but by the self-longing to be born. In this sacred loneliness, we do not become bitter, we become aligned. And in time those who are meant to walk beside us will meet us there, not in the illusion, but in the light. And that is not loss, that is evolution.